How's it going, everybody? This is Jeff, and this is the first video in an Empire at War modding tutorial series. It's my hope that as we progress through this series, you'll acquire the skills that you need to be an efficient modder of the Empire at War video game, while at the same time acquiring general skills that will allow you to venture into the video game design industry if you choose. We'll be using Photoshop, 3ds Max, and various other tools that are available to mod Empire at War. One question that I get a lot is how to make fully functional turrets in the Alamo engine. Particularly if you're a new modder, this can be a daunting task. So let's go over how to make turrets for Empire at War. I've loaded up a turret model that I already had available to me. You'll need to make your own. This is a turbo laser tower that I use in the latest version of my mod, Rise of the Mandalorians. The first step in making a turret is to make sure that we have our model divided into the proper pieces. My model is 3 pieces, yours only needs to be 2. For my turbo laser model, I have the base, which is static. This isn't going to rotate, it's not going to interact with targets or anything in the game. It's kind of just a prop that the turret and barrel will sit upon. The turret and barrel are the next 2, and these are the required pieces to make an operational turret in Empire at War. This piece here is my turret. This piece here is my barrel. We want to make sure and name these appropriately. In Empire at War, the standard naming convention for turrets is B_turret_00. For barrel, similarly, it's B_barrel_00. If we have a unit like a capital ship that's going to have multiple turrets, then obviously the 00 will become 01, 02, 03, and so forth. In Empire at War, every numerical sequence of turrets or hardpoints always starts with 00, not 01. Now that we've named these, we have to go over the most critical component of making turrets in Empire at War, and that's the pivots. Every object in your 3D scene has a pivot point that it will rotate around when you use your rotate tool. To make sure that our turrets function properly when they're exported to game format, we have to make sure that our pivots are set correctly. For the base, it doesn't really matter. We can leave the pivot as is because it's not going to rotate or interact with targets in the game. But for the turret and for the barrel bone, it's extremely important that we get our pivots right. So we'll select first the turret, then we'll go to our hierarchy tab in 3ds Max, click it, and go to Effect Pivot Only and turn that on. This will cause to appear an X, Y, and Z tool here that you can see that shows that we are only manipulating the pivot point. And we want to make sure for our turrets and for our barrels that our pivots are Z up, X forward, and Y to the left. Any other orientation is not going to work in game. And the reason for that is that turrets rotate laterally around the Z axis and elevate around the Y axis. That's how the game is set up, so other orientations will cause your turrets to rotate incorrectly or not work at all. Once we've done that, we want to hit W to bring up our translate tool, and we'll go back to our 4-up view and make sure that this pivot is directly center and at the base of our turret mesh. Pretty simple. It was kind of a cubical shape, so the pivot was already mostly centered. Once we've got it there where we want it, we'll turn Effect Pivot Only off. We'll select our barrel and we'll do the same thing. Turn Effect Pivot Only on, make sure that Z is up, X is forward, Y is left. We'll hit W to bring up our translate tool, and we'll move this back to the far edge of our barrel bone, right there. Turn Effect Pivot Only off, and now we can see that rotates where it's supposed to rotate, and this rotates where it's supposed to rotate. The next critical step is to make sure that this barrel bone will rotate with the turret. Obviously, having it stay in place isn't what we want. So we'll select our barrel bone. We'll go to the Select and Link tool in the top left, turn that on, click from our selected object, and drag to the object we want to link it to. It'll flash once to indicate that the link has been established. We'll hit Q to turn the link tool off. We'll select our turret, rotate it, and now we see that the barrel's rotating with it. The next step is to make sure that our turret and our barrels will only rotate along the axes that we want them to. For the turret, this means that we only want it to rotate on the Z-axis so that it rotates laterally. We'll select our turret, we'll stay in the Hierarchy tab, but we'll go to the Link Info button. Here, we want to make sure that certain locks are turned on for our rotation. We want to lock the X and the Y axis, leaving the Z open. This means that this turret will not rotate on the X and Y axis no matter what we do. We can select the X axis and it's still going to rotate Z. We can select the Y axis, it will still rotate Z. We can select the middle and it will still only rotate Z. Similarly, we want to select our barrel and make sure that only Y is left unchecked. So we'll select X, we'll select Z, and now our barrel will only rotate vertically. So that's the basics. Now we have what is essentially a working turret, but it's pretty bare bones and not ready to be exported to the game yet. We have to make sure that our turret has a bone with which to fire from. To do this, I go to the Create tab in the 3ds Max toolset, and then I select the Helpers button and select Dummy. I place my dummy close to the end of my barrel, go back to my Hierarchy tab, Pivot, Affect Pivot Only, select Center to Object, and now, conversely to how we have our pivot set up for our turret and barrel, we have to make sure that the X-axis faces forward and the Y and the Z-axis, as far as the firebone are concerned, are irrelevant. X forward is the critical part. We'll turn that off. Empire at War has very specific naming conventions. We have to make sure that our firebones are named appropriately or the game won't recognize them. So we'll go up to our naming field, we'll delete dummy 01, and we'll rename it muzzle A _ 00. Any object, whether it's a unit, a defensive structure, a turret hardpoint, anything that's going to fire that only has a single firebone will have to have this name. We'll select it, bring up our Translate tool, and using our orthographic views, we will make sure that this is as centered on the barrel bone as we can get it. That looks pretty good. And then we'll go back to our Select and Link tool and link this to our barrel so that as our barrel rotates or elevates, the muzzle bone will move with it. Just as a precaution as well, we'll go up to our utilities. If this isn't already open, we'll hit More, we'll select Alamo utility and click OK. I already have mine open, so I won't do that. But we want to make sure to uncheck the Export Geometry button so that only Export Transforms is selected. What this means is that when we export it to Alamo format, it's not going to export a cube. It's only going to export a bone, which is centered on the pivot point of our dummy. Alright, we've got our firebone. Now we need to add some textures. We'll bring up the material editor by hitting M. Now I've already set up a 3ds Max shader here that has the game shader with my textures applied to it. So I'll simply select all three components of my turret, make sure I'm selecting the right material, and then hit Assign Material to Selection. One step closer. Now let's make some shadow meshes for this. One note on shadow meshes for Empire at War is that your mesh topology has to be flawless or the shadow is going to break when you export it, creating all kinds of visual errors that are really undesirable for your mod. So make sure that your mesh doesn't have any holes and that any vertices are not overlapping. In other words, if I have two vertices that are sharing the same space, I want to be sure and weld those vertices together. I want to make sure, for the most part, that my mesh is either quads or triangles and has no n-gons. Exporting to Alamo will convert your entire mesh to triangles anyway, and so it will try to solve any n-gons that you have, but it doesn't always do the best job, and I've actually found that when it tries to solve those n-gons and convert them to triangles, it can actually break the mesh. Not usually noticeable if you don't have a shadow mesh, but if you wish to include one, those n-gons converted to broken triangles and broken mesh can cause visual issues. So make sure that your mesh topology is sound before doing this. Assuming that it is, we'll select each component one at a time, hit W to bring up our translate tool, hold Shift, and click on the translate tool. This will make a clone of that object. We'll just name it shadow underscore base and hit enter. Then we'll select our shadow material, which I've already set up. We'll hit assign to object, and there we go. Our base now has a shadow. We'll repeat those steps for the turret, calling it shadow turret, assign the material, and for our barrel, shadow barrel, and assign the material. Now we have to make sure that these shadows move with the parts that they're affiliated with, so we'll select our shadows, go to our linking tool, we'll hit H to bring up our scene hierarchy, and we'll select B turret 00 and hit link. Our shadow is now linked to our turret. We'll select our barrel shadow and do the same thing, linking it to B barrel 00. Now our barrel shadow is linked to our barrel, and they should move together. The final step, and this one's really important, is to make a collision mesh. If you forget to do this, that means that this object cannot be hit by projectiles in-game, effectively rendering it invincible. I've done this so many times, it's a miracle that I remember to do it at all. But once you get your unit in-game and you realize that projectiles are passing right through it, pretty clear indicator you've forgotten. Better just to do it on the onset. Go to your Create tab, Geometry, select Box, and just create a box that will envelop the entire structure. It doesn't have to envelop the entire barrel. Mostly we just want to make sure that it covers the base area and the turret area. Now this isn't required, but it's just kind of good practice. Go to Hierarchy, Effect Pivot, Center to Object. And we'll name this COL for collision. We'll go back to our Utilities tab, and down here in our Alamo tools, we want to make sure that it does export the geometry, but we want to make sure that collision is enabled, that it's hidden, and that it stays hidden under all circumstances. Lastly, we want to open our material editor back up, go to our collision shader, which I've already set up, and assign to object. That's it. You now have a turret model that is fully ready to be exported to the Alamo engine. We'll go File, Export, choose Alamo Object, and name it whatever we want, and hit Save. Just like that, assuming that you don't get any errors, our Alamo turret is now ready to be used in-game. Thank you for watching today's tutorial video. If you have questions about the video or suggestions for future topics, be sure to leave a comment down below. Also, if you'd like to support this channel and the work that I'm doing, feel free to donate to the PayPal link provided in the description below. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.